Dark Souls 2 to me will always be the most interesting game in the series by a long shot. Doomed by Bandai to quickly make a sequel under short time constraints, while the first game's director went on to another project would almost certainly kill any other series before it would even be released. In a lot of ways, it's the most frustrating the series ever gets, with storytelling that feels detached from the other games, and gameplay that lacks the polish many hoped for upon release. But, is the game fun? Most of the time. Dark Souls 2 brought a lot more unique mechanics or just flat improvements to other aspects of play. You can now roll in any direction instead of how it was in Dark Souls 1 where you were stuck playing DDR with only 4 directions to roll in. Poise is no longer a beat the game button, but is still a strong asset to warrant wearing heavy armor if possible. New additions to character building like dual wielding, armors with unique attributes, and the new vitality stat give physical builds more to do in combat and in the level up screen. Spellcasters get an improved attunement stat allowing for faster casting speeds and further fleshed out options with now 4 schools of magic. You now have double the ring slots, allowing for even further customization of your character to really hone in your build's strengths. There's also adaptability, which is new. At their core, Souls games are small tests over and over of knowing enemy movesets, knowing your limits with your character's current abilities, and the risk-reward of putting those two aspects together. The speed of these games are really what separate them. Bloodborne and Sekiro are at this one end of the spectrum and they're cranked up to 11 and it's all go, 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 nightmare, nightmare, nightmare! Dark Souls 2, on the other hand, is more of a pleasant jog. Your character runs for 5 seconds and has to catch their breath. Aww. And you know, I really like that tone shift. Mainly because I hate myself. With hindsight of how the series moved forward after Dark Souls 2, you see large changes in how they designed bosses and areas. Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3, you'll have this huge zone with like 30 enemies and they're all broken up into groups of 4 or 5 that have different weapons and tools to kind of split them up in those groups. Which, relatively speaking, makes it easy as long as you don't try to rush in. Dark Souls 2 looks at that and laughs as they give you 5 Alon Knights, all attacking you at the same time while a captain is pelting your ass with arrows the size of you. More so on the bosses, Dark Souls 3 has a very standardized way of fighting where it's seeing their combos that you can't interrupt or waiting for an opportunity to punish. It more or less forces the rhythm of dodge A, attack B. DS2 bosses, however, serve a different purpose to gameplay, where instead of purely being a challenge at the end of an area, it's more of a final test of were you paying attention to the area you just played in before moving on to the next one. I'd be lying to you, straight to your face, saying Dark Souls 2 bosses are harder or even better designed, but their theming and ideas I would say are more in line with the environmental storytelling. Giant demon kings at the end of their kingdom, a knight forcing those who enter to deal with their own selves before they can attempt to pass. When Dark Souls 2 wants to tell a story with no words, it leaves you speechless. A lot of bosses in Dark Souls 2 do feel unnecessary to most of what's going on, but the ones that do matter are so visually striking to everything else that it forces you to listen. There's genuine defeat and depression in the air that I don't think the other games in the main series even attempt to display. The NPCs in this game have a lot more of a personal journey than the games that come before and after. There's less grand journeys like Solaire's search for his own son, but more down-to-earth struggles like Lucatiel just trying to find a way out of the curse before they forget what they hold most dear. It's not really better or worse than the rest of the series, however I do respect and enjoy the departure from 1, as it does make Drangleic feel more unique compared to the Kingdom of Lothric that we see in Dark Souls 3. The story of Dark Souls 2 is, in a lot of ways, the same story Dark Souls 1 and 3 are trying to tell, just from a different angle. Like Dark Souls 1 and 3, 2 talks about endless cycles, but without the grandeur of this tale of linking the fire and extending the age. Most people don't even know that it's a thing, let alone where it is. At the end, you don't see your character erupt in flames and victory, but sitting on an empty throne locked away, forcing your fate upon you. It takes the idea of cycles in a much more depressing way, almost as if the world itself imposes this view of nothing matters as it's all going to be redone anyways. Kingdoms, livelihoods, relationships, and history are all lost to the ages as this cycle continues over and over. The game does a fantastic job of keeping that hopelessness in the air through visual and level design. Almost every location in this game looks as though it could have been used in multiple different ages and are simply just being repurposed. Things stopped to make sense after a while, almost like the world itself stopped caring how it was built or how you get to certain areas. You go up the top of a huge-ass windmill to see an entire kingdom above it filled with lava. You go up or down large elevators to nonsensical fantasy settings. Intentional or not by the devs, it's an extra layer that goes into the world building that adds to this confusing mess of a world that gives the emotions of a place memories. A world destroyed by time, and all that's left are recollections of what could have been. You lucky bastard, being able to see what terrible path each of those could-haves turned into. The DLCs add to this, by being small kingdoms each brought to ruin from different aspects of the Abyss, a concept from Dark Souls 1 that's heavily expanded on in 2. It makes this very scary and obtuse story idea into a genuine force of nature. Emotions once again come to the forefront, as the queens of these lands all had different human emotions that tore these lands apart. Emotion is more at the forefront here than any other game in the series, and it makes the tale of Dark Souls 2 more personal and hidden. The gameplay of Dark Souls 2, unfortunately, didn't quite get the amount of love I think it should have, and I blame Bandai before I'd blame From0stview. Odd controller issues leading to not having true analog controls, confusing hitboxes at the most inopportune times, and adaptability adding a layer of confusion to the players that is frankly cruel. If given adequate time, these issues wouldn't be in the game, but they are. What DS2's gameplay lacks in polish, it makes up for in power. Some of the ideas From had for the player are just fucking bonkers. Spells larger than the size of some bosses, swords bigger than you being able to be dual-wielded, and more unique weapons than any other Souls game wishes they could have. They gave the player a lot more freedom in the amount of power that they can wield, and abilities they can use to go against the increased number of enemies that feel almost required. Enemies aren't inherently harder, but there are a lot more of them than usual. Trying to play Dark Souls 2 in the exact same way that you would the other Souls games, I think leads to a lot of frustration people have with the level design of the second installment. You have to be more willing to use an actual arsenal in Dark Souls 2, which is compounded by how many upgrade materials you can get in the game. Even including that you can, and probably should, upgrade armor, there's plenty of Titanite left over for you to have multiple weapons to deal with different challenges the game gives you. In the PvE aspect of Dark Souls 2, not having some type of bow or spell does genuinely make things more challenging for you, and I think the unwillingness from most players to adopt those extra tools leads to more frustration than they'd otherwise have. Something that, to me at least, does not get enough attention from these games is co-op. I am a firm believer that Dark Souls 2 is meant to be a co-op experience, and it is just so much more fun with someone else. Seriously, and I can't fucking stress this enough, this shit should have just said play with a friend on the front of the box. Suddenly, all those extra enemies feel a lot more fair as there's now 2 of you on the playing field being able to deal with threats. An entire magic class gains a lot of usefulness due to being able to affect the other players. Most of my love of this game comes from making up challenge runs for my friends and I when we would play together. If you're someone who never plays these games online or summons at any point, trust me, play this game with a friend. You will realize you are missing out. You will thank me later. I also quickly want to mention the amazing work that both Yuka Kitamura and Motoi Sakuraba did to compose some absolutely amazing pieces for this title. They have both expertly crafted some stellar pieces, matching the emotions of every important moment you could possibly think of the game. From major climactic battles to slow, somber moments to reflect on. Every piece has this tinge of sadness and lack of hope that has its own unique beauty. And they further emphasize the strong feelings of emptiness that the visual design, lore, and characters are all working hard to convey. Without the music, they do okay, but with it, it elevates the entire experience that I can't thank the composers enough for. Dark Souls 2 has a lot of flaws, and arguably too much annoying bullshit, which caused the fans to not care as much or simply brush it aside. However, despite that, a lot of praise that the game deserves gets swallowed up by discourse over specific game design decisions that were forced under awful time constraints. A lot of what made Dark Souls 2 special went into future titles, making it an essential building block for the future of FromSoft games and Souls-likes as a whole. If nothing else, Dark Souls 2 definitely deserves respect, and to sit along with the rest of the series for its impact on the future of its genre.